always knew my family didn't see me the way other parents saw their children, but the moment it really hit me was when my mom handed me a so-called gift at a family gathering. It wasn't jewelry, it wasn't a keepsake, it wasn't even a framed childhood photo. No, what she thought was hilarious, what she thought captured the very essence of me, was a custom-printed onesie that read in bold letters, "Surprise baby of a disappointment." Everyone laughed. My uncles and aunts chuckled, my cousins pointed and giggled, even my own father cracked a grin, but all I could do was hold it in my hands and feel the blood drain from my face. That stupid piece of fabric wasn't just a joke, it was a reminder that to them, my existence had always been some kind of accident, an afterthought, a burden that didn't measure up. I tried to brush it off with a fake smile, the same way I brushed off every snide comment, every backhanded remark, every time someone in my family compared me unfavorably to my siblings. But deep down, it carved a wound so deep that I knew it wouldn't heal easily. I was tired of being the punchline, tired of being seen as the one who failed before I even got the chance to try. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a disappointment, that I worked harder than they could imagine, but instead I swallowed it, just like always, and told myself one day I'd prove them wrong. That onesie became a symbol for me, not of who I was but of who they thought I was, and I decided that everything I did moving forward would be fueled by the fire it lit inside me. When I moved out and started working, I carried that resentment as both a weight and a weapon. I poured myself into my job, desperate to prove I could be more than their low expectations. I showed up early, stayed late, and picked up projects no one else wanted. I kept thinking if I worked hard enough, someone would finally see me for my worth. But the universe has a funny way of testing people, because the first company I landed in was like stepping right back into my family's living room, except now the people mocking me wore business suits instead of holiday sweaters. The office was small but packed with drama. My boss had the kind of fake charm that fooled upper management but never fooled those of us beneath him. He'd smile and pat you on the back one moment, then twist your work into his own and take credit the next. He thrived on belittling people, picking favorites, and reminding everyone that without him they were nothing. I should have left sooner, but I thought if I just kept my head down, if I kept grinding, he would recognize me. Instead, he turned me into his personal workhorse. I was the one rewriting his sloppy presentations, fixing his mistakes, covering his missed deadlines, and every time upper management congratulated him, I had to stand in the corner, invisible, while he soaked it all in. And then there were the co-workers. If my family had trained me to endure casual cruelty, my co-workers were like advanced-level tormentors. One woman in particular, let's call her Sandra, was the entitled queen of manipulation. She had a way of pretending to be your friend while subtly dropping comments that undermined you in front of others. She'd steal credit for little things, make jokes that sounded far too much like insults, and act as though she were doing me a favor just by acknowledging me. I watched as she wormed her way into my boss's good graces, not with competence but with flattery and gossip. She whispered in his ear about everyone else's supposed shortcomings, but never about her own. Still, I endured it. I thought maybe I could outlast them, outwork them, outprove them. I told myself the same thing I told myself when I looked at that stupid onesie, I would show them. But showing them came with a cost. Long nights, endless stress, and a creeping sense of isolation. My personal life started to crack under the pressure, though at the time I didn't realize how badly. I had someone waiting for me at home, someone I thought supported me, loved me, understood the struggle. I leaned on them, told them everything about the toxicity at work, and believed they were my safe harbor in the storm. But even that foundation wasn't as solid as I thought. The more I tried to juggle everything, the expectations, the work, the pressure, the more I noticed cracks appearing in places I never imagined. My family still mocked me whenever I visited, reminding me I was still the surprise baby, who hadn't done anything truly impressive. My boss drained me, my co-workers undermined me, and yet I still told myself it was only temporary, that eventually things would change. I didn't realize the real storm was only just beginning, and that my life was about to spiral into betrayal, humiliation, and ultimately revenge that no one, least of all my family, could have ever predicted. The tension at work only grew heavier, and with each passing week I felt more like I was dragging chains around my ankles while everyone else strolled freely. My boss leaned harder on me, piling project after project onto my desk with no recognition, while Sandra made a game out of twisting my words and planting seeds of doubt about me in the office. People started looking at me differently, as though I were incompetent or unreliable, when in reality I was the one carrying their weight. I could see it in the way they avoided me during meetings, how whispers stopped the moment I walked into the break room, and how my boss always seemed to smirk when someone made a comment at my expense. It was like being back at that family gathering with the Onesie, except now the entire office had joined in the laugh. I clung to my relationship like a lifeline. Every night, when I came home exhausted, would vent about what had happened, and my partner would nod sympathetically, offering the usual comforting words. I thought I was lucky to have someone who understood me, someone who reminded me I wasn't crazy for feeling so beaten down. But little by little, I noticed subtle changes. Phone turned face down on the table, late-night texts they wouldn't explain, sudden excuses to work late or hang out with friends I'd never heard of before. At first, I dismissed it as my own paranoia brought on by the stress at work. After all, I was the one drowning in negativity, why would they add to it? But the truth has a way of slipping through the cracks, no matter how carefully someone tries to hide it. The first real sign came from the office gossip mill. Sandra, in her typical smug fashion, dropped a comment one morning when I walked in. She smiled sweetly and asked if I'd enjoyed my partner's company last night, except she said it in a way that made everyone else in the room laugh. I froze. How could she possibly know what I had been doing at home the night before unless she had some connection to my partner? I brushed it off as her trying to get under my skin again, but the thought planted itself in my mind and refused to leave. Days later, I stayed late to finish a report my boss had dumped on me at the last minute. When I finally dragged myself home, I found the apartment strangely quiet, lights dimmed but music playing softly from the bedroom. I thought maybe my partner was surprising me, but when I pushed the door open, my entire world tilted on its axis. There they were, tangled up with someone else in our bed, and not just anyone. Sandra's voice cut through the silence when she turned her head and laughed at the sight of me standing there. The smug grin, the mocking look in her eyes, the pure satisfaction of knowing she had taken from me not only my dignity at work but also my trust at home, made something inside me snap. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I didn't demand an explanation. I simply closed the door and walked out, my mind spinning in 1,000 directions at once. My heart felt like it had been hollowed out, but beneath the pain was a clarity I hadn't felt before. They wanted me broken, humiliated, crawling in the dirt like the disappointment they always believed I was. They wanted to strip me of every ounce of self-respect until I either quit or gave up entirely. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. That night, I sat alone in my car, staring at the steering wheel, and I made myself a promise. No more swallowing my anger, no more smiling through humiliation, no more carrying everyone else's burdens while they laughed behind my back. If they wanted to see disappointment, I would show them something far worse, for them. I would turn every insult, every betrayal, every act of cruelty into a weapon, and I would use it to bring their carefully constructed lives crashing down around them. The next day at work, I kept my head down as usual, but this time it wasn't out of defeat. It was strategy. I listened carefully, noting every detail, every whisper, every careless mistake my boss made when he thought no one was paying attention. I started saving emails, duplicating files, documenting every shady practice he had gotten away with for years. Sandra's arrogance worked in my favor. She boasted loudly about cutting corners, about getting clients to sign things without reading, about skipping protocols to make herself look efficient. I let her talk, and I took notes. My partner's betrayal gave me a strange sense of calm. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. On the outside, I looked the same, Tired, overworked, quiet, but inside, I was sharpening every blade. The betrayal had flipped a switch in me, and I realized that this wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about making them regret ever thinking I was someone they could toy with. I thought about the onesie again, about how my own mother had laughed as she branded me a disappointment, and I decided that when this was over, everyone, my family, my boss, Sandra, and my ex, would know just how wrong they had been. Revenge is not about rushing into a storm with fists swinging, it is about waiting patiently until the storm gathers its own weight and then steering it in the direction you want. That was the lesson I forced myself to follow as I began piecing together my plan. I couldn't let anger cloud me, not anymore, not when I finally had clarity. My boss, Sandra, and my ex had handed me the rope they thought they would use to hang me with, but I was going to twist that rope into a noose for each of them instead. At work, I became invisible by design. I no longer argued, no longer corrected, no longer resisted. Instead, I made myself the perfect background employee. I nodded when spoken to, delivered projects on time, and made sure I never gave anyone reason to suspect I was quietly building a case against them. Every shady practice my boss engaged in went into a private folder, double billing clients, funneling expenses into fake accounts, altering financial documents to make quarterly results look better. I copied every incriminating email, took screenshots of every altered report, and stored them somewhere only I could access. He trusted me with too much because he believed I was weak, and that was his downfall. Sandra was just as careless. She loved the sound of her own voice, bragging in the break room about how she manipulated clients into signing contracts without proper oversight, how she lied about her numbers, how she slept her way into influence. I never confronted her, I just smiled faintly, acting as though I wasn't listening, while I quietly recorded her with my phone. She was too arrogant to even consider the possibility that someone might be documenting every word. Each laugh, each careless admission, each little boast was another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. As for my ex, the betrayal still burned, but it fueled me rather than broke me. They had underestimated me, assuming I would either forgive or crumble. Instead, I waited. I collected messages, I traced their lies, and when I had enough, I planned the timing so that the exposure would hit hardest. I wasn't interested in screaming matches or confrontations. I wanted silence, the kind that follows after an explosion when everyone is staring at the wreckage. Months passed like this, months of careful planning while everyone thought I was still the same exhausted pushover. And then the moment came when all the pieces aligned. The company had an important audit scheduled, and the boss was nervous but smug, confident he could bluff his way through just like he always did. Sandra was busy buttering him up, hoping that if he rose higher, he would drag her along with him. And my ex, still tangled up with her, believed I had quietly faded from relevance, too broken to fight back. None of them saw it coming when I began pulling the threads. First came the evidence dump. I sent an anonymous package to the audit team with every falsified report, every doctored spreadsheet, every email chain that exposed my boss's misconduct. I didn't need to attach a name, the truth spoke loudly enough on its own. The morning the auditors walked in, I watched from my desk as my boss's confidence began to crack, his smile faltering as page after page of proof was laid before him. He stammered, he deflected, but the noose was tightening, and there was no escape. By the end of the week, he was escorted out of the building, not with applause and congratulations as he had always dreamed, but with shame and security guards at his side. Sandra thought she would inherit his throne, but I made sure her turn came swiftly. I leaked the recordings of her boasting to clients she had lied to, and they spread like wildfire. The very people she manipulated turned on her, demanding accountability, threatening lawsuits, and refusing to work with her again. Her reputation, carefully built on charm and deceit, collapsed overnight. She went from strutting through the office like she owned it to slinking out in disgrace, her fake smile gone, replaced by the hollow stare of someone who realized too late they had been outplayed. And my ex, oh, their downfall was the most personal and satisfying of all. I timed it so that the truth about their affair with Sandra exploded at the same moment the office chaos peaked. Screenshots of their messages, photos of them together, proof of their lies. I sent it to friends, family, and even their own colleagues. They couldn't hide, couldn't spin it, couldn't laugh it off the way they once did. The betrayal they thought was their little secret became a public spectacle, and suddenly they were the ones standing in the doorway, exposed, humiliated, with nowhere left to turn. The fallout was chaos. The office turned into a battlefield of accusations and firings. Management scrambled to clean up the mess, but the damage was done. I watched it all with a strange calmness, as though I were standing in the eye of the storm I had carefully summoned. I didn't gloat, I didn't brag, I didn't even let anyone know I was behind it. I simply kept my head down, finished my work, and waited. And when the dust finally settled, the company made an announcement. They were restructuring, downsizing, and offering positions elsewhere to those deemed worth keeping. For the first time, someone actually recognized my contributions. A new opportunity opened up, far better than anything I could have imagined if I had stayed loyal to the toxic mess I had endured. It was poetic justice, not just because I had exposed them, but because I had done it without ever lowering myself to their level. They had tried to brand me a disappointment, a joke, an afterthought, but in the end, they were the ones who lost everything. When the dust settled, I stood among the wreckage not as the broken, humiliated figure they had all expected me to be, but as someone who had endured the fire and walked out stronger. The company's collapse didn't drag me down with it, it catapulted me forward. The restructuring landed me in a new position with a different firm that had been keeping an eye on my work from afar, one that valued competence over charm and integrity over deceit. For the first time in years, I stepped into an office where people looked at me with respect instead of ridicule, where my contributions were acknowledged, and where I didn't feel like I had to prove every second of my existence. The contrast was like night and day, and with every passing week I felt the weight I had carried for so long lifting off my shoulders. But it wasn't just about work. It was about reclaiming every part of myself that others had tried to strip away. My ex was gone, and with them the poison of betrayal. Sandra's downfall echoed around the industry, a cautionary tale of arrogance crashing into reality. My old boss's name became a stain no one wanted to touch, his career left in ruins. And yet, through it all, I didn't feel the need to gloat. Their punishment was the silence of being irrelevant, the emptiness that comes when the lies you lived on finally devour you. My victory wasn't about their destruction, it was about my survival, my growth, my refusal to be defined by the labels they had slapped on me. One evening, after settling into my new role and finally feeling like I could breathe again, I pulled out that onesie from the box where I had shoved it months before. The fabric was still soft, the letters still mocking, surprise baby of a disappointment. For a long time, I just stared at it, remembering the laughter, the smirks, the way everyone had joined in on the joke at my expense. But this time, I didn't feel the sting of shame. I felt something different, power. That insult had been the spark that pushed me through the darkest days, the reminder that I wasn't living for their approval anymore. I took a deep breath, folded it neatly, and tucked it back into the box, not as a wound but as a trophy of everything I had overcome. When I visited my family again, things were different. They still tried to poke at me with their usual comments, but I didn't flinch. I didn't react. I didn't need to. Because now I had my own life, my own victories, my own story that didn't include their definitions of who I was supposed to be. They could laugh all they wanted, but I knew the truth. I wasn't their disappointment, I was the proof that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who rises above all of it. The inspiring part wasn't just climbing out of the hole they dug for me, it was realizing I had the strength to dig my own path upward, to build something better from the rubble. I didn't need to chase validation anymore, because I had proven to myself that I was capable, resilient, and more powerful than they ever imagined. The pain of betrayal, the humiliation at work, the cruelty of being labeled a failure, it all became fuel. And as strange as it sounds, I was almost grateful for it. Without that fire, without those wounds, I might never have found the determination to push as far as I did. People often ask me how I managed to keep going when it seemed like everyone around me was set on tearing me down. The truth is, I stopped trying to win their approval and started focusing on what I could control. I controlled my work, my evidence, my choices, and eventually my revenge. I didn't scream, I didn't fight their way, I didn't sink to their level. I simply waited, planned, and struck when the time was right. That's what turned me from the butt of their jokes into the one person they could no longer ignore. Looking back, I don't regret a single step. The humiliation hurt, the betrayal scarred, but the comeback was sweeter than anything else could have been. Because in the end, I didn't just prove them wrong, I proved myself right. I wasn't a mistake, I wasn't a failure, I wasn't the surprise baby of a disappointment. I was the storm they never saw coming, the quiet persistence that outlasted their arrogance, and the person who turned every cruel word into the foundation of a stronger self. Now, when I tell my story, I don't dwell on the pain. I talk about the lesson, that sometimes the best revenge isn't screaming louder than the people who laugh at you, but outlasting them, outsmarting them, and outgrowing them until their voices no longer matter. That onesie may have been meant as an insult, but to me, it became a reminder that the only person who gets to define my worth is me. And so I moved forward, not with bitterness but with pride. My life isn't perfect, but it is mine, built out of resilience, carved out of betrayal, and fueled by the fire of people who thought I would never rise. If being there at disappointment was what it took to become my own success, then I'll wear that title with a smile, because in the end, the only people who should be disappointed are the ones who underestimated me.